What is wisdom? यहाँ हेर्नु सक्छ थुप्रै मिनिङ यहाँ के लेखेको छ यहाँ विजडमहरु wisdom understanding knowledge what is wisdom what is the difference between wisdom and knowledge हामी meaning of wisdom हेर्नुस्
Wisdom. Noun. An element of personal character that enables one to distinguish the wise from the unwise. Wisdom. Noun. A piece of wise advice. Wisdom. Noun. The discretionary use of knowledge for the greatest good. Wisdom. Noun. The ability to apply relevant knowledge in an insightful way, especially to different situations from that in which the knowledge was gained. Wisdom. Noun. The ability to make a decision based on the combination of knowledge, experience, and intuitive understanding. Reference.
Wisdom धेरै मिनिङ छ तपाई हेर्नु सक्छ यहाँ सबै मिनिङ wisdom तर खास wisdom कहाँबाट पाउँछ कसरी प्राप्त गर्नु सक्छ यहाँ के हो यो कहाँबाट पाउँछ अनि यो के हो अनि wisdom खास अहिलेको संसारमा सबैजनाले wisdom को बारेमा परमेश्वर बाहेक उनीहरुको खोज्छ wisdom त्यस्तै ज्ञानी intelligent एकदम smart धनी wisdom यही हो कि के हो त्यसैले हामी यो wisdom literature मा पढ्ने अब हामी यो कोर्स मा थाहा पाउँछ wisdom साच्चै नै के हो कहाँबाट हो त्यसैले हामी बाइबलबाट पढ्न सक्छ तर त्यो भन्दा अगाडि हामी हेर्नु पर्ने ब्याकग्राउन्डहरु अब खास उनीहरु wisdom को बारेमा के भन्दै थियो म यो त चित्र देखाउने लो यो पिक्चर तपाईहरु के देखेको छ अनि यहाँ के लेखेको छ The cow is red तपाईले छक्क परेको होला के मतलब हो यो The cow is red के छ के देखेको छैन किन काउ गाई त छैन त्यहाँ अनि गाई किन रातो है त्यसो त्यो तपाईहरु त छक्क परेको के हो भनेको हुन सक्छ देख्नुभयो यो त एकजना यहाँ मान्छे छ यो मान्छे के पिक्चर देख्यो होला बाटोमा अनि यो गाई किन रातो के हुन सक्छ अर्को मान्छेले सोधेको अर्को यहाँ ट्याक्सी भित्र मान्छे के देखेको कि यो त कथा बोल्दै छ गफ गर्दै छ कि यो एता मान्छे यहाँ भित्र बसमा कुरा गर्दै छ सोध्दै छ गफ गर्दै छ कि हुन सक्छ देख्नुभयो यहाँ यो त चित्र यो त के लेखेको छ त्यहाँ सोधेको छ कि बा तपाईले बुझ्नुभयो यो शब्द तपाईहरु यो त्यस्तै हामी यो कन्टेक्स्टमा हेर्नुपर्ने एउटा कुनै लेखेको छ हामी वरिपरिको बुझ्नुपर्ने कहिले बोलेको कोले बोलेको कुन अवस्थामा बोलेको त्यसपछि तपाईहरु बुझ्नुहुन्छ त्यसै यहाँ तपाईहरु बुझ्दैन के लेखेको छ द काउ इज रेड गाई किन रातो भयो कि रातो पेन्ट उले के भन्छ स्पिल उहाँको जिउमा लाग्यो कि हुनसक्छ त्यो बेला त्यसपछि त्यो मान्छेले ओइ त्यो गाई रातो भयो त्यसपछि हामी बुझ्नु सक्छ त्यस्तै हाम्रो बाइबल पनि त्यसै बुझ्नु पर्ने अब विजडम के हो हामी त्यो उनीहरुको पछाडिको कन्टेक्स्टमा हेर्नु पर्ने त्यो बेलाको त्यो मान्छेहरु कस्तो थियो त्यो बेला हामी बुझ्नु सक्छौं अब जस्तै तपाईहरु पिक्चर देखेको अनि के हो यो अनि त्यस्तै हामी विजडम पनि त्यस्तै हुन्छ विजडम के हो कहाँबाट हो कसरी सुरुवात भएको अनि अहिलेको संसार पनि विजडम धेरै मिनिङ हुन्छ जस्तै मैले यहाँ एउटा निकालेको Wisdom is the ability to make sensible decisions and judgments because of your knowledge or experience. Wisdom is a human quality and achievement and is a cultural legacy imparted by teachers and parents. Right? Wisdom नै अब teacher कि बाउ आमालाई उनीहरुलाई दिन्छ wisdom त्यस्तै अब knowledge त्यस्तै अनि तर यहाँ संसारमा प्राय उनीहरुको विजडम भने बित्तिकै उनीहरु परमेश्वरको कुरा भन्दैन यहाँ त्यस्तै लेखेको It normally emphasizes human efforts and people nowadays seldom associate wisdom with God. Tara, whereas in the Bible, wisdom is the first of God's work and participated with Him in the creation of the world. Asi तपाईहरु पेन्टाटुकमा पढेको थियो अनि तपाईले थाहा छ सबै जेनेसिस देखि ड्युटरोनोमी सम्म Who is the one who created the world? हाम्रो बाइबलको अनुसार त परमेश्वरले क्रिएट गरेको अनि सँगसँगै the word of God which is wisdom सँगसँगै यो संसारमा परमेश्वरले क्रिएट गरेको अनि त्यसपछि wisdom is the skill of living life as God created and intended and it is lived out with the awareness of God as His creator. Wisdom को देखाउने मतलब कसरी लिभ आउट गर्ने कसरी जिउने अब त्यो अनुसार परमेश्वरले कसरी संसारले क्रिएट गरेको सृष्टि गरेको अनि हामी कसरी जिउने हामी त्यही अनुसारमा हामीले जिउनु सक्छ त्यो कारणले विजडम धेरै गाह्रो बुझ्ने त्यसैले हामी पहिलाको कल्चरमा पहिलाको क्रिएसन देखि हामी हेर्नु सक्छ जस्तै पहिलाको उहिलेको मान्छेहरु उनीहरुले सबै लिटरेचर लेखिसक्यो अनि हामी यहाँ त्यसैले what is wisdom literature wisdom literature मतलब के हो लिटरेचर मतलब उनीहरुले सबै लेखेको किताब विजडमको बारेमा अनि from creation उहिले नै मान्छेलाई पुरा उनीहरुको लिटरेचर हामी देख्न सक्छौं अहिलेसम्म पनि धेरै के भन्छ त्यो राखे त्यो डिस्कभरी उनीहरु अहिले पनि अलिसम्म म्युजियम छ त्यो सबै त्यहाँ लेखेको छ यो त किनभने बाइबल त साँच्चीको हो त्यसैले हामी पनि देख्न सक्छ विजडम लिटरेचर पहिलाको पनि बाइबल भित्रको पनि होइन तर अर्को पनि बाइबल बाहिर पनि किताबहरू यस्तोहरू किताब होइन लेखेको छ अनि एउटा एक्जाम्पल इज विजडम लिटरेचर को एउटा लेखेको इज द विजडम अफ अमेनेमोपी यो एउटा इजिप्सियनको literature. It is a literary work composed in ancient Egypt अनि variously dated between 1000 BC and 600 BC. यो उनीहरू सबै धेरै लेखेको छ Proverbs त्यस्तै उनीहरू सबै sayingsहरू त्यस्तै छ. The likeness of it to the book of Proverbs suggests that it was influenced by the wisdom literature of other ancient Middle Eastern cultures. म देखाउँछु एउटा भिडियो पनि बिटा भिडियो अब त्यो इजरायलको कल्चरको ब्याकग्राउन्ड अनि यस्तै एउटा पिक्चर पनि देखाउँछु यो विजडम अफ अमेनेमोपीको पिक्चर कस्तो थियो कस्तो उनीहरूको कसरी लेखेको छ ल हेर्नुस् यहाँ यो विजडम अफ अमेनेमोपी को उनीहरू लेखेको छ अनि यो प्रवर्ब्स त्यस्तै उनीहरू एक लाइनमा लेखेको थियो यस्तो छ यो सेयिङ्स पनि एकदम प्रवर्ब्स सँगसँगै सेम रहेछ त्यो कारणले उनीहरूको कल्चर इजिप्टसँग पनि धेरै इन्फ्लुएन्स भएको किनभने तपाईँ पढिसक्यो पेन्टाट्युकमा उनीहरू इजिप्टमा बसेको थियो त्यो कारणले यु क्यान सी द इन्फ्लुएन्स उनीहरूको सबै त्यहाँ इन्फ्लुएन्स हुन्छ अनि यो भिडियो हेर्ने त्यो कल्चरहरू अलिकति उनीहरू बताउँछ त्यो ड्युरिङ द टाइम अफ द आयुबको बुक अनि प्रवर्ब्स र इक्लिसियास्टिसको ब्याकग्राउन्ड
The Hittites withdrew from Babylon shortly after its conquest. They left the region in a state of chaos. The vacuum of power enabled a new people, known as the Kassites, to exert their authority over southern Mesopotamia. We know almost nothing of the origin or language of the Kassites. Like other newcomers, they swiftly integrated into Babylonian society. They wrote their documents in Akkadian, and their customs and beliefs seem to be no less Babylonian than that of the native inhabitants. What we do know is that a Kassite dynasty ruled Babylon and its area for no less than 400 years, between the years 1595 and 1155 BCE. The capital of the Kassite kingdom was the city of Babylon. A detailed political history of this period is unavailable to us because only a limited number of relevant texts have survived. In contrast to the political and historical aspects of the period, its literary production is well documented. During the Kassite period, scribes ceased to write and read Sumerian. Instead, they began to focus on copying classical Akkadian texts and composing new ones. Here is one example of an important text written in Akkadian that was composed during this period, a poem describing a righteous sufferer who questions the divine judgment. The poem is called Ludlul Bel Nemeki. In Akkadian, this means, I will praise the Lord of wisdom, which is the first line of the text. Ludlul Bel Nemeki is sometimes considered a parallel to the biblical book of Job. You may find additional information about this interesting connection in the recommendations for additional reading.
So this is the story called Ludlul Bel Nemeki, I will praise the Lord of wisdom, and the Lord of wisdom in this case is Marduk. And essentially it tells us of the relationship between man and God. The first two tablets are about the suffering of this character. and tablets 3 and 4 about the redemption. And essentially what happens is this character is a very important man at court, life is perfect, then something goes wrong and he can't understand for the life of him why, but it completely ruins his life. His enemies turn the king against him, his titles are stripped away from him, he's dishonoured, even the lowest of the low attack him in the street, he's despised and loathed, and in tablet 2 he gets these horrible afflictions, and none of the doctors, the magicians, they can't work out why he has these problems or how to solve them, and he's at death's door. And then we have the redemption. So Marduk steps in, his anger is appeased, he cures the problems, the medical issues, and he puts him back in a position where he walks down the street of Babylon and people look at him and think, crikey, he's come back from the dead, effectively.
To the north of the Kassite kingdom lay the Middle Assyrian kingdom. Its capital was naturally the city of Ashur. A long-lasting dynasty of Assyrian kings ruled the kingdom during this period. Middle Assyrian scribes made some contributions to the literary tradition of Mesopotamia. One of these was a collection of laws called the Middle Assyrian laws, which are important for comparative research. They will be discussed in our unit on the law. Middle Assyrian scribes also developed the old genre of royal inscriptions. Basically, Mesopotamian royal inscriptions consisted of poetry glorifying the king. In the Middle Assyrian period, the Assyrian scribes began to enrich the traditional royal inscriptions with annual reports of the king's achievements. For each year, they detailed his military campaigns, building enterprises, etc. The inscriptions provide a precise documentation of the king's deeds, appearing in chronological order. These texts are called the Assyrian Annals. They are considered a treasure trove for historians of Mesopotamia. By the end of the 10th century BCE, the kings of Ashur began conquering more and more areas in northern Mesopotamia until they built a strong local kingdom. 200 years into this process, the Assyrian kingdom transformed into a vast empire. This was the largest and strongest empire ever seen in the area. It ruled over the entire Fertile Crescent, including, for a limited period, parts of Egypt. The genre of Assyrian Annals, which we mentioned in the previous lecture, provides historians with details regarding the endeavors of each Assyrian king during each year of his reign. We are thus able to reconstruct a clear picture of the political history of the Assyrian Empire. Here are some prominent kings of the Assyrian Empire. I will refer mainly to those who have some biblical connection. By the way, in this period we find for the first time a direct historical link between Mesopotamia and Israel, which is recorded in the historical texts of the time. The empire spread westward, and one of the many nations occupied by the great Assyrian kings was Israel. King Shalmaneser III was an aggressive conqueror who greatly expanded the boundaries of the empire. His inscriptions explicitly mention two Israelite kings, King Ahab and King Jehu. Shalmaneser campaigned against both.
In 1846, Layard excavated at the city of Nimrud this imposing black obelisk, which we now know as the Black Obelisk, and it's a record of the long and successful military career of an Assyrian king called Shalmaneser, and we read about this on the inscription at the top. The 5 scenes that wrap around the obelisk each come from a different part of the world, and what he seems to be doing is highlighting just how far he's been able to campaign. From a modern perspective, the most important by far is the second story here. Here we see Shalmaneser himself, and the winged disc up here, this is the god Ashur who protects him. Groveling on the ground is the figure, the key figure of the scene, and the caption tells us that this is somebody called Yaul from the house of Umri. And it wasn't long when this object came to scholarly attention and they worked out what the cuneiform said, what the cuneiform really meant. And it wasn't long, of course, before they related it to Jehu, and this must be the house of Omri, although, strictly speaking, it seems not to be from the house of Omri, but you can imagine from an Assyrian perspective, this is a detail that they weren't too bothered about. They're at least in the right part of the world.
Tiglath-Pileser III was also a very powerful king. He conquered extensive areas of the Kingdom of Israel, exiling many of its inhabitants. His conquests significantly weakened the Kingdom of Israel. The Bible also tells us that he accepted the surrender of Ahaz, king of Judah. Shalmaneser V imposed the final siege on the Kingdom of Israel. The subsequent king, Sargon II, completed the process by destroying the kingdom and exiling its inhabitants. Sennacherib embarked on a famous campaign to Judah, during which Jerusalem was saved at the last minute, but Lachish was destroyed. The destruction of Lachish and the exile of its inhabitants are described in detail in a large relief from Sennacherib's palace.
The palaces of the Assyrian kings were decorated with these wonderfully detailed carvings, these reliefs, originally brightly coloured. Now the paint has gone, all we can see is the stone underneath, but they preserve an incredible record of the deeds of the Assyrian kings. These come from the southwest palace at Nineveh, the palace without a rival, and here we can see at the start the Assyrian army mustering, attacking somebody, some poor unfortunate rebel or enemy. This is the key to the entire battle scene. Here we can see defeated population has come out to grovel at the feet of somebody, and the Assyrian soldiers, the officers, this high official, are again approaching a figure to the right, and here he is sitting on a throne with some servants behind wafting the flies away. And this is, so the caption tells us, King Sennacherib, but importantly it also tells us where the city is, and for them it's Lachish, or as we know it, Lachish. And we know that Sennacherib campaigned in 701 BC at the city of Lachish. He made it his headquarters for the invasion of that part of the world. And we have, of course, a parallel account from the Bible of exactly this episode.
Finally, I will mention King Ashurbanipal, who built an enormous library in Nineveh that housed texts of a wide range of types from various periods. Ashurbanipal's library included more than 30,000 clay tablets kept together in a big archive and organized by shape and content. Ashurbanipal's library marks the era as a cultural golden age. The texts found in this library serve as a primary source of information on Mesopotamian culture, literature, and religion until today. Following Ashurbanipal's death, somewhere between 639 and 620 BCE, Assyria began to decline. The causes for this decline are not entirely clear, but the process was so swift that by 605 BCE, most of the empire's territory was ruled by a rival Babylonian dynasty whose center lay in southern Mesopotamia.
तपाईहरु त्यो भिडियो हेरेको तपाईं थाहा हुन्छ. I hope you are you see the evidences of the Bible. अनि त्यो ब्याकग्राउन्डहरु, कल्चरहरु त्यहाँ थाहा हुन्छ. अनि त्यो ब्याकग्राउन्ड अफ प्रोभर्ब्स अनि इक्लिसियास्टिस, आयुब सबै त्यो हिस्टोरीमा छ. अनि we can see that it is through the wise men, right? The wisdom literature revolves around the professional sages or wise men, scribes in the service of the court, and consisted primarily in sayings about the practical, intelligent way to conduct one's life, and in speculations about the very worth and meaning of human life during those times. त्यो सबै त्यो वाइस मेन नै उनीहरु उखान्त चाहिँ भन्दैछ. अनि कसरी लाइफ कसरी जिउने, अनि जीवनको मूल्य के हो सबै यहाँ भन्दै छ अनि हामी यहाँ हेर्नुस् wisdom literature of Israel revolved around the God of Abraham, Isaac and Israel, their monotheistic culture as contrast to their neighbors who are polytheistic. Israelको wisdom literature देखिहाल्छ उनीहरू खाली एउटा परमेश्वर मात्रै अनि नेबर्सहरू उनीहरूको अर्को देशहरू धेरै देवताहरू हुन्छ अनि the wise men of Israel differ in their roles from the priests who perform religious activities and leads people to respond to God, while the prophets deliver messages from God. The wise sages or men takes the truth and leads people into reflective process. उनीहरू wise menहरू इजरायलमा they have different roles भिन्दै रोल भूमिका उनीहरू त्यो प्रिस्टहरू के हो पुजारीहरू उनीहरू परमेश्वरसँग कसरी उनीहरू पूजा गर्ने कसरी परमेश्वरलाई वर्शिप गर्ने अनि आगम भक्तहरू उनीहरू परमेश्वरको सन्देशलाई उनीहरू कसरी के इजरायलाइट्सलाई भन्ने तर यो वाइज मेनहरू यो यस्तो त्यस्तै प्रॉभर्ब्स लेख्नेहरू उनीहरू यो सबै उनीहरूको सत्य कुरालाई अनि मान्छेहरूलाई कसरी उनीहरू त्यस्तो सोच्ने अनि कसरी जिउने उनीहरू त्यस्तै उनीहरूको भूमिका हो त्यो अनि यहाँ मैले यहाँ अलिकति लेखेको छ प्रॉभर्ब्सको dates compiled is around 700 BC to 400 BC अनि Ecclesiastes 935 BC त्यो पनि कुनै मान्छेले भनेको 300 BC त्यो एकदम उनीहरू कन्फ्युज किनभने कुनै मान्छेले भनेको सोलोमन लेखेको कुनै मान्छेले सोलोमन होइन त्यो कारणले स्योर नै छैन अनि आयुब पनि कुनै पनि भनेको पछि कि patriarch एज मतलब अब्राहमको बेला त्यो बेला गरेको त्यो कारणले मैले भिडियोमा दुईटा हालेको हुन सक्छ धेरै अगाडि अनि धेरै पछाडि पनि हुन सक्छ तर मेन उनीले it involves all the dates अहिले हामी wisdom literature as in Proverbs, Ecclesiastes and Job हेर्ने है अघि हामी wisdom literature in general हेरेको अर्को देश पनि हेरेको अनि अहिले हामी यहाँ हेर्दैछ Proverbs, Ecclesiastes and Job are the writings of Israel in the biblical story and they are inspired human responses to the words and deeds of God that are recorded in the law and prophets and यो उनीहरूको responseहरू अनि likewise the authors or compilers are wrestling with many of the issues found in the wisdom traditions of other cultures उनीहरू पुरा कन्फ्युज भयो इश्यूजहरू त्यो समस्याहरू अनि किनभने उनीहरू if you remember they had to conquer Canaan अनि वरिपरि उनीहरू धेरै देशहरूको विजडमहरू ट्रेडिसनहरू उनीहरू देखेको उनीहरू पनि त्यो सँगसँगै उनीहरू पनि सोच्दैछ के हो उनीहरूको रिफ्लेक्सन गर्दैछ Even though their content assumes Israel's God and story as the basis for their reflection, their method is very similar to what one finds in other ancient Near East traditions. हामीले थाहा छ Proverbs, Ecclesiastes and Job उनीहरूको कन्टेन्ट उनीहरूको लेखेको छ उनीहरूको बेसिस नै परमेश्वर नै हो अनि उनीहरूको सबै जीवनमा इज रिभल्भिङ अराउन्ड गड तर उनीहरूको यहाँ हामीले देखिसक्छ उनीहरूको इन्फ्लुएन्स पनि बाहिरबाट पायो त्यसै अघि मैले देखाएको त्यो भिडियोबाट उनीहरूको बाहिरको त्यसरी तपाईँ पढ्यो भने त्यही यस्तो त्यो ब्याकग्राउन्डमा सोच्नुपर्ने जस्तै म अघि चित्र देखाएको अब तपाईँ त्यो वरिपरिको केही थाहा छैन भने तपाईँ अर्कै मिनिङमा लान्छ यहाँ कन्टिन्यू गर्छु है यहाँ nevertheless wisdom is seen differently from surrounding nations उनीहरूको परमेश्वरबाट ल्याउँछ विजडम तर सराउन्डिङ नेसन्स त्यो देश वरिपरिको देश उनीहरू अर्कै विजडम अर्कै मिनिङ हुन्छ So if we are to understand the books of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job, we have to understand it in the context of the larger framework of the biblical story. We get a glimpse of the culture of the Israelites in the Pentateuch. God had made a covenant with Abraham and has chosen his descendants to be his people. अस्ति तपाईले पढिसक्यो पेन्टाट्युकमा केको कल्चर उनीहरू कसरी के अरे लिभाइट्सहरू उनीहरूको के यस्तो लहरू के कसरी जिउने सबै कसरी के अरे सबै लेखेको छ तपाईँ थाहा बुझ्नु सक्छ अनि the wisdom teachings gives further insight into the life of the covenant त्यो लसहरू त्यो के भन्छ त्यो लसहरू उनीहरू त्यहाँ लेखेको छ के गर्नुपर्ने के गर्नु मिल्दैन तर विजडम टिचिङ नै उनीहरूलाई तपाईलाई जहाँ मजाले हेर्नु सक्छ खास उनीहरूको जीवन कस्तो थियो त्यहाँ हामीले त्यो पनि के भन्छ अलिकति के अरे इन्साइट अलिकति यस्तो देख्नु सक्छ अलिक डिपर हेर्नु सक्छ कसरी उनीहरू कसरी जिउँदैछ अनि किन त्यस्तो भन्दै थियो त्यसैले the life of the Israelites are very connected to the promised land of Canaan उनीहरू इस्राएल भन्ने बित्तिकै उनीहरू एकदम कनेक्टेड उनीहरू केनान जमिन उनीहरू जमिन छैन भने त्यस्तै उनीहरूको के अरे देश छैन उनीहरू त्यो एउटा के भन्छ आइडेन्टिटी हुँदैन त्यो कारणले तपाईँ त्यो अनुसारलाई बुझ्नु पर्छ प्रोभर्ब्स इक्लेसियास्टिस र जोबलाई पढ्ने अनि हामी हेर्ने अनि यहाँको के अनुसार के assumption दिन्छ These books has their fundamental assumption that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. While this is less said in Ecclesiastes and Job, God and his story are nonetheless foundational for their wrestling with the larger question of life. How to understand the undeserved suffering of the innocent, Ayub to say, and how one should live the short span of years like a mere vapor God has given. तपाईँ यो हेर्नु सक्छ that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. अनि at the heart of both this book is the reminder that true wisdom has to do with the fear of God. Job पनि त्यहाँ लेखेको छ तर एकदम स्पष्ट भनेको छैन तर तपाईले पाउन सक्छ अनि all of the wisdom literature is built on the foundation of the importance of the fear of the Lord. And this includes the recognition that God is behind the creation. God has created wisdom and order. The wise person will acknowledge God and follow God's plan. So wisdom concentrates on human conduct in society before God, and the assumed reader is my son, which could be the teacher's own progeny or student, or could refer to anyone in the next generation who needs this instruction. प्राय यो विजडम भयो भने उनीहरू कसरी जिउने सोसाइटीमा अनि कसरी प्राय त त्यसै त्यो स्टुडेन्ट हो कि छोरा छोरीहरू त्यस्तै कि नेक्स्ट जेनेरेसनलाई भन्ने त्यसैले the central framework and goal of biblical wisdom literature is the formation of character. It describes values and virtues, the roles of community and individual in the formation of character, and the relationship of the self to the world and to God. यो biblical wisdom literature main कुरा is कसरी यो चरित्र बनाउने कसरी डेभलप गर्ने है अनि तपाईहरु कसरी परमेश्वरसँग सम्बन्ध बनाउन सक्छ अनि एकअर्कालाई पनि सम्बन्ध गर्न सक्छ अनि there are two types of wisdom literature एउटा is proverbial wisdom meaning proverbs short pithy sayings which states rules for personal happiness in failure प्राय short pithy sayings मतलब छोटो छोटो उखान त्यस्तै छ अनि दोस्रो speculative wisdom सोचेको speculative means तपाईहरु डिक्सनरी हेर्न सक्छ अनि Job and Ecclesiastes this type of literature may be further subdivided एउटा is monologues मतलब एकजना मात्रै बोलेको दोस्रो dialogues like Job पहिलाको मोनोलॉग एकजना बोलेको त्यो Ecclesiastes त्यस्तै आफ्नो यस्तो बोलेको सोचे बोलेको त्यस्तै अनि दोस्रो is dialogues दुई जनाले बोलेको त्यसै लाइक आयुबको पुस्तकमा अब हामी यहाँसम्म पढ्ने यो हप्ता अनि म अब नेक्स्ट वीकमा प्रोभर्ब्स सुरुवात गर्ने अब प्रोभर्ब्स को ब्याकग्राउन्ड भन्ने तर त्यो भन्न अगाडि तपाईहरु असाइनमेन्ट सबमिट गर्नुपर्ने यहाँ लेखेको छ अनि assignment to be submitted on September 11 Friday 5 p.m. अनि readings मा is Proverbs 1 Proverbs 9 to 18 त्यो सबै पढ्नुपर्ने अनि यो क्वेशनहरु यही छ how do you read and interpret the book of Proverbs अनि are all the proverbs to be taken as absolute promises यो Proverbs को पुस्तक कसरी पढ्ने कसरी इन्टरप्रेट गर्ने यो सबै प्रतिज्ञा सबै सच्ची नै हो एकदम निश्चित हुन्छ हो अनि सेकन्ड क्वेशन what do you think is the relationship of these verses in connection to the whole book of Proverbs यो Proverbs 1 from Proverbs 1 to Proverbs 9:18 यो verses कसरी कनेक्ट गर्ने त्यो पुरै Proverbs को पुस्तक कसरी रिलेशनशिप कसरी सम्बन्ध कसरी गरेको मतलब कसरी रिलेशनशिप गर्छ अनि next question is what are the two ideas contrasted here and explain यहाँ दुईटा यता भित्रमा दुईटा आइडिया दुईटा सोच त्यही केरे छ तपाईहरु हेर्नु पर्छ अनि तपाईहरु एक्सप्लेन त्यहाँबाट हेर्नु पर्ने यो आउटसाइड सोर्सेस हेर्नु हुँदैन यो तपाईहरु अन्नी फ्रम द बाइबल तपाई पढ्नुस् अनि तपाई आफ्नो सोच्ने अनि लेख्नुस् अनि next question what are the two main ideas illustration shown here can explain दुईटा मेन आइडिया के थियो त्यहाँ दुई इलस्ट्रेसन मतलब रिप्रेजेन्टेसन स्टोरी त्यस्तै के छ त्यहाँ इलस्ट्रेट गरेको विजडम के हो यस्तो इलस्ट्रेट गरेको छ त्यहाँ दुईटा मेन आइडिया छ त्यहाँ तपाईहरु पढ्नुस् अनि त्यहाँ पाउँछ अनि लास्टमा तपाई जहिले पनि हामीले एप्लिकेसन चाहिन्छ यो what can you learn from these verses and how will you apply it in your life तपाईले थाहा छ मैले खोजेको एप्लिकेसन है कसरी एक्चुअल गर्न सक्छ है अनि अर्को लास्टमा I have posted 2 YouTube video links WhatsApp मा अनि त्यहाँ भन्दै थियो on how the world looks at wisdom and knowledge अनि त्यो त संसारको अनि तपाई यो सबै पढेर यो युट्युबको भिडियो तपाईँले पनि निकाल्नु पर्छ what do they say is wisdom अनि त्योहरू react to their points according to what you have learned from wisdom in the book of Proverbs, whether you agree or disagree to their ideas and explain why. अब यो पढेर त्यसपछि उनीहरूको पोइन्ट्स भनेको छ नि सबै त्यहाँ युट्युबमा त्यो अनुसार तपाईहरु रिएक्ट गर्नुपर्ने कुन चाहिँ उहाँले भनेको तपाईले अग्री अनि कुन चाहिँ भनेको तपाईले डिसअग्री गरेको नमानेको अनि किन नमानेको because you are comparing it with the book of Proverbs अनि त्यो सबै एक्सप्लेन गर्नुपर्ने अब यदि मैले यस्तो भनेको होइन यो त यस्तो होइन किनभने यस्तो 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 प्रॉब्लममा यसो भनेको थियो अनि त्यसै अनुसार तपाईले रिएक्ट गर्नुपर्ने I hope you will enjoy learning from Proverbs अनि तपाईहरु पनि नबिर्सनी तपाईहरु फिडब्याक अझै फिडब्याक दिनुपर्ने every week Your feedback includes your schedule, your learning schedule, includes your devotion, and includes your assignment. गएको हप्ता धेरै राम्रो तपाईहरु गरेको थियो अनि मेरो आशा तपाई अझै राम्रोसँग गर्नुस् अनि त्यो रेफरेन्सेसहरु नबिर्सनुस्. Thank you.